Discrimination by Silka Chambers. Nurse Charity stepped around the curtain to exam cubicle number 6 of the emergency department and collided with a small boy of about 2 or 3. The snotty-nosed youngster laughed as his mother picked him up. "Sorry, nurse," the woman said. She wiped the child's nose with her thumb and forefinger and then ran her hand down her pant leg to clean it off. Charity tugged a paper towel from the receptacle on the wall and handed it to the mother. The mother wiped her fingers on the paper towel, then reached up and swept a strand of hair away from her face. Charity detected an old dye job, brassy brown crowned with graying roots. She was dressed in jeans with worn-down cuffs and an orange T-shirt that said Circleville Pumpkin Festival on it in faded letters. The mother sat her young son on the edge of the gurney and stepped forward to introduce herself. "I'm Jennifer Rich, and this here's Darryl," she said, indicating her husband in the chair behind her. Darryl raised his styrofoam cup of coffee in greeting. The drips of coffee blended in with the other stains on his once white T-shirt. Mrs. Rich began pointing to the various children that were crowded in the cubicle with them as she recited their names. "Them are Daisy, Delilah, Dustin, Drake, and Duke." "Cute, all D's," Charity thought, mentally rolling her eyes. "And don't those names just scream backwoods?" "We're the Rich family," Mrs. Rich continued. "Not rich in money, but rich in love." A groan arose from the brood. Apparently, they heard the speech before. The children were all dressed in faded, ill-fitting clothes, and the boys sported home-cut bowl hairstyles. The two girls, aged 7 and 8, were lying cozily together on the gurney. What looked like twin 3-year-old boys, Dustin and Drake, were darting about the room, opening cupboards and rooting through their mother's purse. One of the twins stepped repeatedly on the trash can pedal, opening and closing the metal lid. When the other toddler almost got his head caught beneath the lid, Charity turned it to face the corner, making the pedal out of reach. The two minions went in search of more mischief elsewhere. The last child was a teenage boy seated in a corner on a wheeled stool, legs sprawled out before him, peering at the cracked screen of a cell phone. Sandy brown hair fell carelessly over his forehead and eyes. His feet were cramped in ripped high tops, and his jeans rode up his shins. He seemed oblivious to the commotion being caused by his younger siblings. Charity extended a hand to Mrs. Rich. "Great to meet all of you." She then turned her attention to the two girls lying on the gurney. "Which one of you is sick?" Delilah pointed to Daisy. "Me," Daisy said in a hoarse whisper. She produced a croaky cough. The child's color was pale except for the pinkness of her eyes and around her nose. Her eyes were held at half-mast, and she was clutching a worn stuffed animal in one hand and a fistful of used tissues in the other. Thin blonde hair hung damply about her face and neck. She had the look of a lost fairy. The more robust Delilah was clearly the self-appointed guardian of her younger sister. She kept her arm around the girl's shoulders, supporting her in a semi-sitting position. "She been coughing a lot," Mrs. Rich said, "and had to miss school. Now her ears hurt." "Did you take her to the doctor?" Charity knew the answer before she heard it. She was tired of parents who let their children's illnesses go on too long and who used the emergency room as their doctor's office. Located in southern Ohio, the hospital's emergency department saw its share of families who originally hailed from Appalachia, as well as many Amish, people who were often suspicious of modern health care and used the emergency room as its last resort. Clearly, that is what was happening here. "Her ears didn't hurt till tonight, and then the clinic was closed," Mrs. Rich said. "She'd been coughing for a week, though." Charity took a moment to do a quick physical, focusing on lungs and breathing. "Breathe deep, in and out." The young girl complied as Charity auscultated all lung fields. She entered, coughing, wheezing in upper airways in the E-chart section under primary complaint. She also noticed an inflamed throat and tonsils and an elevated temperature. Okay, Mrs. Rich, I'll do a quick strep test. Also, have they taken a chest x-ray yet? They did the chest x-ray as soon as we got here, the father, Daryl, contributed. Okay, good. Charity swabbed the child's throat for the strep test and placed it into a specimen bag. The doctor should be in soon, she said as she exited the cubicle. Dustin and Drake followed her through the curtain and into the corridor. Charity glanced back and watched Mrs. Rich chase them around until finally Daryl stepped out and planted his expansive frame in the twins' path. Seeing the stern expression on their father's face, they slunk back into the cubicle, followed by the exhausted mother and the stoic father. Charity passed the ER doc, Dr. Starr, and nodded to her as she continued down the corridor. She handed the strep test to a lab tech, then paused at the patient refreshment area, a bit of counter space at one end of the cramped emergency department, equipped with a mini fridge that sometimes held cold beverages. A seriously stained coffee pot on the countertop was warming thick black brew. There was enough for one cupful, so Charity poured the coffee into a paper cup and turned the pot off. She added powdered creamer and sugar to the coffee, helped herself to several juice boxes from the mini fridge, and grabbed a handful of graham cracker packets. These she shoved into her scrub top pockets. When Charity came back to the ER cubicle with the snacks, Dr. Starr was finishing her examination of young Daisy and saying, "This antibiotic is for her strep infection. Make sure she takes every pill. If she's still coughing badly on Monday, keep her home from school." Charity gave the coffee to Mr. Rich, seated in the chair. He smiled at her and balanced it on his generous abdomen. Dr. Starr continued speaking. "How many other children are sick?" The 3 younger ones all raised their hands. Did they think they were going to get a prize? Charity thought. Mrs. Rich said, "One of the twins, Dustin, I think, was coughing. His nose is running, too." "I'll give you a script for enough pills for Daisy and a liquid for both of the twins," Dr. Starr said. "If anyone else gets sick, call the clinic for a prescription for them, too." She handed the scripts and homegoing instructions to Mrs. Rich and turned to leave. "Thank you, Doctor," Mrs. Rich said, her lips in a grateful smile. Dr. Starr nodded and left the cubicle. Charity offered the crackers and juice boxes to the children. They tore into the snacks, the twins fighting over the graham cracker packets in typical toddler fashion. Charity made sure Mrs. Rich understood the homegoing instructions before leaving. "You can get the medication at the hospital pharmacy before you leave." "I appreciate all you done for us, nurse," said Mrs. Rich. "Daryl lost his job at the coal mine 3 years ago when we had them twins, and they won't hire him back with his diabetes. It's not even that bad. He just takes pills is all. They say he's a health risk. He's strong as an ox, but they won't let him work." Charity was incensed. "That's discriminatory. You should appeal." Mrs. Rich shook her head. "Don't know who to go to, and we don't have much money neither. We've been working at some fairs over the summer, but it don't pay much." Charity thought for a moment and wrote down the name of a lawyer friend of hers and his phone number on a Post-it, along with her name. Handing the note to Mrs. Rich, Charity said, "Call him. Maybe he can help. He's an attorney for the Public Health Department. If you tell him my name, he won't turn you down." Mrs. Rich took the slip and placed it with the prescriptions and instructions in her generous handbag. She woke the sleeping Daisy and collected the rest of her brood. With her husband's help, they herded the children past the curtain of the cubicle, Daryl carrying a twin beneath each arm. Mrs. Rich turned and said, "Thank you, nurse," and clasped Charity's hand. Charity's eyes misted as she felt the depth of this mother's gratitude. She watched the family disappear out of the emergency department, the girls holding hands, and Duke, the oldest child, scuffing his sneakers along the floor behind them. Pressing her hands onto her cheeks, burning with self-reproach, Charity wondered how she would have handled it if suddenly she or her husband were out of a job. Would they be able to make mortgage payments, pay off her student loans, provide health care to her sons without insurance? It was something to think about. Charity dropped off the Rich Family folder at the ward clerk's desk and continued working her shift, feeling humbled and a little shamed by her original assessment of the Rich family. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please click like and subscribe, and visit the channel frequently for more stories read by me, the author.